particularly looking at finished vehicle logistics, we have two senior leaders in organizations. For with vehicle logistics, of course, is one part of the responsibility. But what we really want to look at today is the bigger picture, where vehicle logistics sits in a total supply chain organization, where it sits in a sales and marketing operation. And we really do have two fantastic guests to join us today. I'm going to invite them to the stage. First, Steve Center, who joined Kia America January this year as Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President after a career at Honda, and really pleased to join, that Steve Center could join us today. Steve, why don't you come up on stage? Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Also very pleased that Chris Stiles, who leads the supply chain management organization at Nissan North America, so of course a huge network of plants responsible across inbound, order forecasting, ordering, and vehicle logistics. Chris Stiles from Nissan North America. Thanks, Chris. Have a seat. I can see. You can have a seat right next to. Well, just sit right next to Steve there. Okay, so again, I encourage you to, we'll make this interactive. So of course, I, as always, have my sets of questions, but I encourage the audience to get involved as we go along. So as I mentioned, you both have responsibility across your organizations, not just vehicle logistics. As I mentioned as well, low inventory, disruptions. I want to talk to both of you about how that is changing. Vehicle distribution is changing within these organizations that you're responsible for, how it's monitored, how you're tracking it. I'm going to start with you, Chris.
It's definitely changed, and probably not going to change back to what we saw, 2 years ago. I would say, I think it's, as far as monitoring, tracking, pretty much every vehicle we build right now is sold before we build it. So therefore, the pressure from, the final customer side is immensely different. It used to be a customer goes to a dealer, they find what they want, that day they buy it, they leave, so that's it. It's not like that anymore. Now it's a much more build to order model versus build to stock that we would have had, a few years ago. So figuring out how we can give better visibility is really increasing in priority. So working on a lot of options on, okay, how do we really tell a customer when to expect that vehicle? So I think that's probably one of the biggest transitions, and I don't think it's going to change back. So, yeah.
And Steve, as mentioned, you oversee what is effectively the sales operation for Kia in the US. Talk to us a bit about how vehicle logistics and distribution is changing within the organization.
Well, this is a part of the business that you used to never worry about. You had things planned out months and months in advance. The cars showed up. You had a huge buffer of inventory at the dealerships. So no one was looking for any particular car. In fact, if a car was very late, no one noticed in many cases. Now the pipeline's empty. We're sold up the pipeline. Everyone wants to know. You have the Amazon effect, where everybody thinks you can tell them where the car is it around the corner. The game's changed entirely.
And Chris, you alluded to this. I mean, this as with the game is changing at Nissan is the perspective that this is the new normal. This is the way we want to run the business. I mean, not perhaps exactly this way with the chip disruptions, etc. But pipeline selling, this is the change that the supply chain wants to follow.
Yes, not just supply chain. I mean, I think it's now enterprise wide with Nissan, and as far as it's a much better business model. When you're not sitting on so much days of inventory at the dealers, there's not so much, kind of back and forth on pushing cars versus a demand that pulls the cars. And you see the success that comes along with it. We see it with the dealers, we see it in profitability. We see it, from a planning standpoint, production standpoint. So you're right. I mean, the semiconductors and Shanghai lockdowns and all that, that keeps surprising us. It's part of it, but I think it's really kind of shown what's the right business model versus the way we would have operated in North America in the past. The Amazon model is a great model. It's that used to be my quote too. It used to be the Walmart quote. If you're a Walmart customer, you expected to walk in the store, whatever you're looking for, they have it. You go. Now it's Amazon, same kind of thing. Where is it? They've got it, and now it's we've got to kind of catch up, I think, as far as being able to provide that visibility, and so that the expectation, doesn't create a disappointment on the back end, with the customers. So I think it's definitely globally, even for us, that's where it's already there. So.
Years ago, automakers used to daydream about becoming Dell, where they got your order, they took your money up front, and then they delivered the product. Well, guess what? We're all Dell now, and we're not quite ready for it.
Yeah.
And I think through a series of different mishaps that were not planned for, this industry has been turned into that old Coke machine, where you pulled one bottle out and another one rolled in behind it. And that's really the challenge that we have, because that's the expectation.
As you just said, it sort of happened, perhaps more than it was planned. I mean, it was an ambition, but then it was forced into it. So when we look at maybe the things that need to catch up to make it work better, and we both referred to pipeline ordering, cars being sold. If we take that, do you have the visibility that you need to really see where those cars are, even perhaps before they're built, and really track that for the customer? Chris, starting with you.
We're getting there. But the visibility has to start with the vehicle being ready to be shipped, right? So, and there's so many factors that can come into play between production and the car actually going on a train or a truck or a boat. So once it's moving, I think we're getting much more accurate on expectations of delivery timing and things like that. But it's all the kind of the before that point that really can create some gray areas that frustrate the dealers, frustrate the customers, that, why hasn't my car shipped, right? And then once it's shipped, then we can, we're still looking at some technologies and things, obviously, that can help us track it, whether they're, onboard technologies with the vehicles or what, many of the partners here offer as far as visibility technology. So I think, it's going to evolve, but it's going to evolve a whole lot faster than we would have thought, 2 years ago. So.
Chris alluded to something that I don't want to escape the audience. At some point in the not too distant future, when all of the cars are equipped with telemetry, at the point of that car's birth, it'll be live, and you'll be able to track it down the line. Today, there's too many handoffs, and some are companies that are external to the OEs, and the information systems are imperfect, and the data transfers are imperfect. There was something I studied over 30 years ago that IBM had, and Mobil used it. They called it Speed Pass for a while, and it was a way to get gas at the pump. And it came from pig farming. And apparently this little glass chip they would inject in pigs, and when it was time for their shots, they'd run the pigs down a run, and it would sort them, the ones that had the shots or not. And the guy at IBM said to me, well, in pig farming, he says, the only one that can tell the pigs apart is the mama, and the mama's bacon. So those little glass modules are basically what the cars are going to be when they're broadcasting. So I think it's going to take care of itself in the not too distant future, but right now it's kind of a mess.
It's a bit of a pigsty.
Yeah, I guess so. A data pigsty.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, when we think about the, I can imagine right now that there's a clamor for allocation from dealers, customers. Talk a little bit about how that process is changing or having to adapt in terms of the allocations that you assign across regions or in particular customer groups, how dynamically you can perhaps change and adapt this. I'm going to go back to you on this one to start.
Yeah, it's evolved, or it's changed from idealistic pre-planning months out to last minute. You don't know what's going to get built until late. Parts don't show up at the factory, they show up short. Sometimes you have to rearrange what you're going to assemble with what you have. We were talking earlier, if you've seen that movie Apollo 13, and they dump all the stuff on the table to try to help these guys build an adapter. That's what it's like at the factory sometimes. So on Friday you have a meeting, they said this is what we're going to get. Monday morning, well, this is what we got. And it's further complicated by regulations. So you have emission types and where are you going to send the cars. So the dealers want them, the dealers have them sold, they've got a waiting list. We can't honor the queue and the sequencing. It's really very, very difficult.
Similar, Chris, or is other?
Yeah, I mean, you talk allocations, it can mean different things in our organization, but when we talk what vehicles are we going to build, it starts at a global level. And then, and then we start looking at, okay, what visibility do we have whether it was semiconductors and then the latest with the Shanghai lockdowns and things like that, because it went beyond semiconductors recently on what parts we would get and what we wouldn't. And so at least it starts with allocations of high-level percentages, and then it kind of gets really broken down into specifics within the actual models, the plants, the region, and then it transitions. We meet daily with marketing and sales and all the companies on, okay, here's what, to the point where here's what we've got, here's what we're going to build, and here's who's going to get it, right? Whether it's within the North American market or export markets or things like that. And then it's a lot of times it's been last minute decisions. I mean, we announced to our parts supply base, our parts suppliers, our goal and intent is to give 3-month windows. 3-month windows of production. We're not going to change that production forecast within this 3-month window. It'll roll, right? But as soon as we did that, China locked down. And then so then it's like, well, that didn't work. So we're still going to do it, but it's just kind of, everything that comes at us really creates a lot of last minute decisions. And then it just trickles into everybody here, right? Yeah. I mean, it trickles into really understanding, okay, what's the capacity I need from a trucking standpoint? What are the rail cars I need? What are, the shipping, ship capacity I need? And as fast as it's changing, it's just really making it a much higher need for flexibility across the whole network. And that's a big challenge. It really is.
In a system that by its nature is not very flexible as you get closer to the end point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as that great seer of vehicle logistics, Mike Tyson once said, everyone makes a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So.
I used that on a slide one day.
So, as in many ways, as you said earlier, Chris, the shift is positive, at least when we look at profitability, when we look at some areas of utilization and things like that. But perhaps the danger is the customer satisfied right now? What is the customer feeling? Who's paying, by the way, more? And again, that's good for the OEMs, lower spiffs and stuff like that, but nonetheless, paying more, waiting longer, not doing the thing they're used to doing, like driving off the lot today with their car. So does that change the way you have to think about the total customer distribution experience, for example? Or actually, is there a sense that the customers are changing along with it? Steve, particularly in your role as the sales side.
Well, the customer expectations continually rising. Right now, we're not able to live up to their expectation. I think in the future, I think Chris said earlier, it isn't going to return back to the way it was. So we're going to be able to accommodate the customers, but today, it's impossible. And if you consider that they're paying more, in many cases, they're paying thousands above the window sticker, whereas normally it's discounted from that. They're rather irritated. And they have a right to be.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an education process with us and with the dealers, and the dealers with the customers. And one thing I think customers are starting to understand, because it's not just vehicle supply chain that they're being impacted by, right? It's much broader. So they're starting to understand more of, wow, these are real challenges, not just trying to buy a car. But I think the better that there's transparency and communication with what their expectation needs to be, then it lessens kind of the negative impact on that side. And so I think some areas we're pretty good at the transparency and the communication than others. We just need to keep trying to reinforce it and just let people know here's what's going on. I mean, it's that way their expectations don't get really kind of completely out of line with what we can do.
So here's a sales pitch to the consumer. You're going to pay more than you thought. You're not going to get what you want. You're not going to be real pleased with the experience. That's kind of the business that we're all in.
And then I'll slap you in the face.
Slapping customers in the face. That is definitely a takeaway.
That's what it feels like.
No, that absolutely, and I think that's the sort of the risk here, isn't it? I mean, when we talk about good profits and setting a business model in a way the direction it should have gone, but if the customer ultimately feels this way, at a certain point something's going to give. Whether that's going elsewhere, whether that's other ways that, whether it's other business models in terms of subscription or what of the above. So I think it is an interesting point now. What you alluded to it, I think, Chris, in terms of visibility, transparency, sharing. Probably shouldn't say the car's going to be there Monday if you don't know it. and that's kind of a key. But if we look at concretely maybe some steps that you're taking to improve that, and I mentioned up front, ETA is definitely, I think, a leitmotif across this event. So what are some things from the Nissan side to start that you're doing to improve that ETB predictability and accuracy?
Well, I think we have pretty good, as I mentioned, I think we have pretty good predictability from the point the vehicle is moving, right? I think we can accurately provide an ETA, within a certain window of time, a couple days or whatever, that's acceptable. I think it's before that point that really kind of creates the confusion at times on, was a vehicle held because there needed to be some quality check or some other item. So, but at the same time, once the vehicle is shipped, then, there, in many cases, literally the day the truck arrives, the customer's there. And so we've got to give them that visibility that, okay, your car's going to be here Wednesday and you can come pick it up at this time. And I think it's definitely getting more accurate, but we're just working with all the carrier partners and everybody else. It's just kind of how do we keep improving that so that what the dealer finally says, yes, your car will be here Wednesday, the customer will show up and the car's there and they're not disappointed. So,
How about for you, Steve?
Well, data standardization would be helpful. So I think we should all work together to try to make it easier to pass the files and the information. And then the independent carriers that a lot of us rely on can participate in that. Because I don't think anyone owns their whole distribution channel from beginning to end. But there's a dirty downside to sharing all this information, and that's the number of questions that you're going to start to get. Why's that car been sitting there for 4 days? Today, they just don't know where it is. So you're just getting the question, where's the car? But the why, that's a lot harder to answer.
Yeah, I've always thought some of the visibility, those who know this industry, why it might be in a certain yard in the middle of the country.
Well, we don't want to have to explain loads
Yeah.
to people. Well, you live out in the country and it's going to take a couple extra days to get a load that way.
Yeah. Yes, and that's a good point right there. And is that something, Chris? So, for example, geo-based load building around whether at the plants, the yards, ports. Have you been able to? I mean, again, it's not something new that we talk about in this industry, but it feels like something that's now really important to get right. Is it starting to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've always been working on. I mean, create more efficiencies for the carriers and obviously for the experience of transparency and how do we deliver and all that. But it's still not as easy, and especially now with such low volumes and when you're trying to build, or the carriers are trying to build and consolidate loads and optimize, a truck driver's time and the cost of moving those vehicles, then sometimes, yeah, you do have to wait. And to Steve's point, yeah, it's hard to explain that phenomenon to an end customer, right? It's kind of, they don't normally want to think about that. So I think it's definitely, we need to keep working more with the carriers on what can we do, as far as, helping to build, I would say, better consolidation in our shipment plans and our production plans so that there's batches that are easier to manage, and speed up some of those times to really kind of help the carriers have what they need on the back end. So, yeah.
If I could politely blame some of the upstream, when that gets normalized, then eventually that will. Although I think it's going to be a lot longer than everybody thinks, because you have a lot of entities are running at full supply. And just in time was a bit of a fallacy, because you had buckets of buffer stock all along the upstream before the factories. And all of that got exhausted with all the shutdowns and COVID. And no one's going to invest in extra capacity to solve a short-term problem. So I think it's just going to take a lot of Saturdays and Sundays over maybe 2 or 3 years to rebuild those buffers. But once the manufacturing gets normalized, you can start to sequence the plant for the logistics, which a lot of companies do. So what comes out of that factory door, it's all going on the same rail car to the same railhead, and then the truckers are all queued up that way too. But right now, it's just a mess.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve mentioned earlier data standardization would help. Chris, I know we've spoken before, projects at Nissan to integrate more into the cloud, standardize that data sets and have a better view than to get to things like data analytics, predictive analytics. Has it helped in this scenario for vehicle logistics, or is it still a work in progress? And also, maybe to add to that, data is great when it's looking over historic data we can predict based on, but when there's Shanghai lockdowns or things which we've never experienced before, I don't know if it helps in those scenarios.
It helps when there's more stabilization, obviously. I mean, that's a given. And, I do think, when you talk about kind of alignment across, the OEMs and figure out how do we standardize what our requirements would be so that they can be standardized with all the partners. Telematics, I think, is definitely going to play a big role in that as that continues to evolve, and vehicles are getting very similar types of technology from a telematics standpoint, and then hopefully we can transition that into something that we can continue to standardize like we would do with EDI transactions or parts ordering or things like that. That the industry's been able to standardize some of those complexities throughout the years, but I think we probably do need to come together a bit more on what does that need to look like and how do we each work toward that versus all these silos of here's what company A is doing, B is doing, C is doing, and see what the just because we know it's just going to create too many complexities if we can't figure out something that it really kind of helps everyone else. So,
yeah. Steve, we'll speak at various points of the event with some of your key logistics providers like Glovis, who will work day in, day out on these sorts of things. But again, looking more from the visibility you can or are providing to your dealer network and other partners. We just talked about the danger of maybe having too much, but do you feel you're starting to get what you need, or just not at all yet?
No, we're not there yet. And a lot of it is the upstream disruption.
Yeah.
Because of the uncertainty of manufacturing, and when you have global manufacturing, that further complicates it. When you're making decisions about what to build in the short term, it's very disruptive. And right now, you have orders for cars you don't plan to build because you don't have the right equipment bundles. So it could be, it's going to turn into what can I get, as opposed to what do I want.
Chris, you both have mentioned in many cases it's the upstream that's causing the biggest headaches, and clearly I think we can all recognize that. And in the industry, which has lower volume overall right now, in a sense we would think, well, outbound capacity surely it's there. We're not running at the 17 million rates we were. However, it doesn't seem to feel like that out in the field.
So where'd they go?
Well, yeah.
These people have vanished.
So where would you identify areas, or are there areas we need as an industry whilst we're here to focus on? Be it a transport mode, be it bottlenecks that we're facing where we can start to address.
I think, we are seeing bottlenecks. We're seeing what I would call bubbles of lack of capacity in certain areas, whether it's rail cars or trucks. I think there's several reasons. I think one, from a rail car standpoint, the railroads have struggled a bit as far as maintaining the flow, right? Because when something stops at one spot, there's bubbles that are created downstream, right? And part of that is caused by the upstream lack of production, or an OEM builds several thousand vehicles that are not ready to ship, and then they get the parts finally and they repair, and then all of a sudden they flood. From a demand standpoint, they flood the network with, it's trying to get as many as they can. So all those kind of disruptions as far as creating bubbles really has an impact, and it can have an impact for weeks or months. On the truck side as well, you see some of the same thing. It's certain railheads can have spikes, and then others can be very low for weeks or months or whatever. So obviously the trucking companies have to adjust and go where where the volume is, and then once they do that, then your network flow gets out of whack again. We're seeing it on the ocean side. It's globally right now. You're seeing it everywhere, and it trickles all the way down into within the region. So I think that's a big part of it. And then obviously even for trucking companies to get more trucks, to get kind of extra equipment. I mean, again, the lead times are much longer than they ever were before. So I think all of it's compounded into that, and it's going to take, I don't know how long, but it'll take quite a bit of time to get it back to something that's more normalized. But
It's the asymmetry that we're suffering with right now.
yeah.
So, this asymmetry, again, we have, in many ways, the ingredients in the room. There's carriers, there's trucking, there's rail, there's technology providers. We have sales groups and even dealer representatives. So what are the next sort of steps we should be taking together to address these things? Again, we can't fix the lockdown in China, but we can address perhaps some of these other imbalances in places. Steve, I'll start with you.
Well, share as much information as we have, but also manage expectations. We talked about that earlier. Our dealer customers have expectations, and we should be as transparent as possible with them about current situations. And perhaps what we need to do is increase the frequency of our communications. It used to be pretty rote. You'd have these monthly cycles or every 2-week cycles. I think we need to do a better job of communicating what we know that's certain and what is also uncertain.
Chris?
Yeah, I think communication is more critical every day. And really I'm hoping that, all the partners that we work with if they don't feel like they're getting the right level of communication, that they tell us, right? That they tell us, hey, I need to know more about this or that. And if we don't know the answer, then we say we don't know the answer. But at least we need to know what is it that we're missing a point on from an information standpoint that maybe they're not getting. So that would be something that I think, we all need to get better at, just to help everyone with what their planning and forecasting is to the point we can. So,
And you alluded to so much of the last minute, and I mean something again, we know in this industry for years, it's always month-end, quarter-end, wholesale targets. That clearly also creates a pinch point, somewhat artificially perhaps in points.
It's real personal.
Yeah.
This is cash flow.
Yeah.
So we can't ship the cars, you can't get paid for them.
Yeah.
So that's just an exacerbating problem.
So if anything, that's now getting even worse than before because
you never had to worry about that.
Yeah.
It was just a big money printing machine, and now the money's all bundled up in places.
So I was going to say, is there scope to smooth some of that, where we don't need to create an artificial pinch point, or again, is that just not a point because the money's got to come to the bank basically?
Well, if you think about it, if the industry's off 15%, that's 15% revenue. Yeah. Now, there's other expenses we don't have right now, like the huge incentive and discounting expense, but still your revenue's off. And when you can't ship things or finish products because of some shortage, that's frozen capital. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, I think pretty much everyone's gotten out of the push model from a month close, wholesale, quarter close. It's what have we got, right?
Yeah.
And we ship everything we've got. Right. And then we hope that we can hit whatever the target was or the updated forecast, or from a free cash flow standpoint, same thing. I mean, that's something that we're monitoring extremely closely. Free cash flow, not just from the finished vehicle side, but from the parts inventory side too, because we're still ordering parts to build cars, and then all of a sudden we missed this one component, but all the rest of the parts are there. So really trying to manage how does that impact the overall business also.
So our revenue is in the hands of Derek out there from Glovis. So as many as you can deliver, we can charge for.
Darren Acker from Glovis, who will be on stage tomorrow, and we'll expect all that revenue then in some brown bags or something. Yeah, exactly. No pressure. Any questions from the audience? I'm happy to keep going, but if there's anyone would like to just hand up, and we'll have some mic that come to you. No, you're all still drinking your coffee to wake up. If we, maybe going back to the business model again, and obviously it's a buzzword, but we did see during COVID a lot more online ordering, and obviously some OEMs talk a lot more about direct customer distribution models. This business model point, as we've seen already, we heading more in that direction? Is that something that's starting to come into where you're looking at your future supply chains? Chris?
Yeah, we actually were one of the first to implement very quickly an online ordering model. Majority of our dealers adapted it really quickly. So basically the model is you go online, you order, but then it really funnels you to the dealer that can serve what you're looking for and then provide the delivery. And it's been very well received. I think it's something that definitely will stick around. I think it's just really what customers are used to from an online ordering standpoint, whether it's, you know, food or groceries or any other goods. Now that they see they can do it with the new vehicle, it's taken off really well. So I don't see that going anywhere. I think that's something that will just continue to expand, at least, you know, from our side.
And does that already, has that already changed certain ways where you, I mean, if you have the vehicles to store, but in theory, would it change where you store vehicles for distribution based on?
Not really. I mean, like, again, at least the model for now is more based on the dealer within the area, right?
Yeah.
So if you can line up the vehicle that's already there at the local dealer, then they're the ones who are going to deliver it. So.
But it should at the very least give you even more transparency of those orders and ultimately data to plan that network.
Yeah.
Steve, at Kia.
Well, you have to be careful with online ordering because you have an allocation process. So there's a big disconnect. So in a sense, what it really is matching. So the allocation and the production ordering is going on in the background. Customer wants a car, they can configure the car, but they're going to get matched to something you were going to build anyway. So, and then they pick a dealer. But does the dealer have enough cars to fill that order? So I think what we're going to see is a disconnect between customer demand and what the allocation systems are doing. But also, and we shouldn't downplay this, there's a lot of gaming that goes on in those situations. So you have people who aren't really buying the cars. I'll call them ticket master, you know. So they're out there trying to scalp the customer pre-ordering process. And when you do matches at the end with who ordered the cars versus who really took them, there's huge disconnects. So we need to be careful with this and not throw the keys to the market.
Right. That would make the distribution process even more of a pigsty.
Well, and then those customers don't show up.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, all the manufacturers have this misguided notion they want to get into retailing. And they think Tesla is selling cars directly, but Tesla isn't selling cars directly. They just own all their dealerships, so they're operating like a chain store. So we have to be really careful about what we want and what we try to implement. In Kia's case, there's 750 plus or minus independent dealers with their own processes and their own way of doing things. Some guys take deposits, some don't take deposits. Very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talked earlier about obviously costs rising, and this is a challenge across the whole economy at the moment. If we look at vehicle logistics in the context of, Chris, let's say your overall budget for logistics and supply chain in a year, is it sort of is it rising faster than other parts of the industry due to some of the issues we're talking about, or are we controlling that? I mean, we know fuel costs, we know rates are under pressure.
No, it's definitely rising as far as what the expectation is going to be from a cost standpoint. I mean, fuel is what it is.
Yeah.
But even all the other factors that are underlying, whether it's, you know, driver type costs that flow through, it's maintenance, it's parts, it's everything that from an economic standpoint that really has kind of just built up so much momentum as of late that it's gotten to the point where we're having to make a lot of adjustments from a commercial standpoint and really just to maintain that we've got capacity. And so I think it's just a product of really what's going on with, you know, the industry, the economies, the global economies, the you know, any other kind of disruptions that are out there. So yeah, it's definitely taking a hit as of late. Yeah.
And Steve, again, when you look across let's say the operating budget of Kia, are you alarmed by the number which is now going to logistics?
Well, you see the cost pressures there. So you have fuel costs, you have labor costs, and then you have, I'd say, you're going to pay for what you're not using also.
Yeah.
In that sense. So we watch it closely. It's not something you like to tinker with very often, and the pricing for that as well. So you move it when you have to.
Yeah. Do you? I mean, we know volume is low at the moment for the reasons we've been talking. If we look at the vehicle logistics capacity, obviously we're seeing pinch points for the reasons we were just talking about. But we know there's drivers and carriers that have gone and probably may not be probably aren't coming back. When the chip shortage eases and production can start to rise again, are we facing issues that if we don't address them now? Are there concerns about what 2023, for example, or whenever that point in time might come?
No, there's definitely concerns from a capacity standpoint. So it's going to be more around how do we work with the partners on, how do we understand what's needed to lock in capacity versus our expectations for the next 2 years? Because knowing the lead times on whether it's, facilities or equipment or other things, because a lot of it, has left. So it's kind of, if we're going to plan for these volumes that we're all talking about, how do we make sure that the network's there to support it? So we've got to really lock in with, here's the plan, here's the commercial, contractual types of obligations, and then make sure that people are moving along with that side of it. So,
We were talking out in the hall before, and there's another shock coming, and that's and this isn't my genius, it was told to me. Electric cars, they're going to change your capacities, and that's going to further create a problem where you can't ship as many cars on the same vehicle because of the weight. And other rules. So I think there's all kinds of shocks ahead of us coming, and we ought to really consider this and be ready for it.
That's why we're here. Are there ways to work smarter together on this? Obviously with the carriers and the providers here, but at an OEM level as well. I mean, planning for those, looking at those standards, which may be changing. Communicating together to government or whatever it might need to do, even sharing capacity where is necessary.
Well, you have to involve the regulators who usually don't care what you think and just have their own ideas. So I think we need to engage with the DOT and those organizations to make sure we understand the impact of the future and that we're prepared for the change.
Yeah, I think there's going to be those discussions. I mean, if we're going to continue the push for, for electrification, continue the push for zero emissions and things like that, then the regulators and anyone else in the discussion is going to have to realize there's going to have to be certain allowances for how that needs to work. And then also there's going to be a lot of pressure put on the companies that support it as far as their ability to optimize in support of all of us. From the OEM side, what do they need to optimize what they're doing? I mean, they mix loads now, right? So how's that going to play out, in the near future when the EVs, in 2030 are, half of the market? I think it's something that, working closely with the legislations and really kind of seeing where are the pinch points that need to be raised, and that's going to be on some of us, with our government affairs teams, with our other industry type action groups and things like that. What points do we need to point out to them and say, look, this is going to hurt for what your objective is, and we need a solution.
Because it's going to come down to 8 of these or 6 of these.
Yeah.
Maybe we become UPS and start charging by the pound.
But and this is not a theoretical future. Nissan is making huge investments in Canton, for example, to build EVs. When we talk at a Hyundai Motor Group level, huge new plant and battery production, which is coming to the US. So again, this is in a distant future. It's something in the pipeline, in many cases happening, that will leave for a long time. So what's your message to people in this room, to your network partners, about what we need to do to prepare particularly as we see some shorter-term issues on capacity, and then obviously looking longer term. So Chris, I'll start with you on that.
I guess the message would be, it's going to be here fast as far as some drastic change. From a Nissan side, our 3-year plan is pretty much to build what we build today across all of our plants in North America. So that's not going to change, but 3 years goes by really fast, right? And beyond that is when you'll start seeing the Canton transition. You're going to see some other transitions, some other investments and expansions, and it's kind of what do we not know that we need to know from all the carrier partners on, look, this could be an issue and we need to talk about it, because I think we need to start it now, all those discussions, because it's, like I said, it's going to be here much faster than any of us think it will. So.
Yeah, there's an expression, change takes a long time, but then it happens all at once. So my recommendation is we should all talk and think about this.
Yeah, well, and it's, the business model has shifted on its head is the perfect example of what you just said. It was talked about for a long time, and then all of a sudden I had to live with it. So using this opportunity now. A last question just to close, because a lot of what we're talking about on a long-term basis, whether preparing for the fleet transformation for EVs, reducing emissions in line with targets, will require investment from across the industry, including the providers in this room. As an OEM, dealing with your own investments and your own cost pressures, do you have an approach to help and support this picture, this investment that your partners need to make, and what would the examples of that be? Start with you, Chris.
I think from our side, it's build where we want to sell, right? So that's definitely an approach from an investment standpoint, and it's not just for the manufacturing, it's also really transitioning back again to localization of parts supply and things like that. That's part of the strategy, and then looking from a global standpoint, when you look at CapEx and everything that comes behind the investments, it's where does the company see the most opportunity for the future for those investments. So I think, obviously we're seeing the opportunity here with our announcements recently for Canton and then some of the others, Mexico as well, with very significant investments, probably the biggest we have going on globally right now. So I think that's kind of the underlying strategy of where the funds are going to go. Yeah.
Anything you'd add to that, Steve?
Not much, except some wise words someone I worked for a long time once told me. He said, prior planning prevents poor performance. So need to think about this.
Excellent, and as you just put it before, we need to talk about this. We need everyone in this room to be talking about this, and that's why I want to thank both of you, senior leaders in this industry, taking time to address and share your thoughts with our audience, and of course to continue the networking. So thank you so much, Chris Stiles from Nissan, Steve Sender from Kia.
Thank you.